There's no scarcity of problems in the continent. This is where the young people are coming in right now. This continent has brilliant minds. Young people in Africa are more interested in the way this continent is governed now more than ever before. I was already in classes where we used to organize seminars in development. We basically profile African countries and compare them to other countries. For me, Rwanda was an exceptional story.
Hello there. My guest this week on the Longform podcast is Ousman Touray. A Gambian Pan-Africanist, Ousman is the chairperson of the Young Ancestors Foundation. Known for his strong views on Africa, he turned down an opportunity of a scholarship to Canada and opted instead to do his master's degree here in Rwanda. Before this episode starts, I want to make a deal with you. About 85% of you who watch this podcast frequently haven't yet hit the subscribe button. If you enjoy what we do here, here's the deal I want to make with you. If you hit that subscribe button, I promise you that we will keep making the show better and better in every single way. I hope you choose to come along with us on this journey. Now let's get into the show. Ousman,
Sunny,
welcome to the Longform.
thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm sure that this conversation that we're about to have will really not just help us have a better understanding of who you are as a person, but issues around being a young African man, as well as Pan-Africanism, Africa's future, and maybe even your own experience in Rwanda, because I was doing a bit of research and I discovered that you and Rwanda are like this. You're kind of together. There's something about Rwanda that you found calling your name. And so this conversation will really kind of unpack all of that. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yes. I want to ask you the first question. The life choices that we make are often a function of the country, of the families that we come from, and kind of the countries that we are in. So before we go deep into today's topic of Pan-Africanism and all that, tell me more about Ousman, the Gambian young man, the person who was raised in a family, obviously, was born in an African context, in a country called the Gambia, the smiling coast?
Smiling Coast
of Africa. Tell me more about that, Ousman.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such question. I think as a young person that grew up in the Gambia, I came from the provincial Gambia with my mom and dad being farmers, but my dad also had another areas where he was already known for, and that is a scholarly work, because he had a madrasa, like
A madrasa, what's that?
That's like a school, an informal school setting, where he used to teach, religious teachings from the Quran to other religious books. But on top of that, our home was a kind of a hub where people come in to develop skills on farming and many other things. So this is in the provincial part of the Gambia, in one of the most remotest, areas. I was born and raised by my two parents at home. At the time, there was not much in such community. We didn't even have a school, like
So
a
it
formal
was-
school system.
So it was the quintessential African village.
African village. So there was no school, there was no health facility or whatever. People had
Electricity?
Electricity is something else. It started from not having the very basic, then electricity, nothing. So at the time, both my mom and dad have been very active in farming as well. until I grew up to be around 7 years, 8. Now the government says the community needs school. So if you look at our societies then, there was a whole detest for Western education. So our parents at the time didn't welcome
Western education.
Western education, nothing to do with going to school. So we basically had a training back home that was, you guys need to strive in other fields, maybe business, maybe other things, but going to school was just not part of the story.
Can you help me understand the two things that I realized I did not ask you? How old are you?
Yes, I am 29 now.
29. So, okay, and you're talking about the fact that the society at the time did not want you to did not believe in Western education. Can you help me understand why?
Yeah, I think basically, for anyone who knows those societies, Gambia is a country number one, which is over 90% of the population as Muslims. And, education when it comes to religion and everything that comes with it used to be very fundamental and at the core. And number one, Western education was seen as a kind of something that's going to come to erode those values within our societies, number one. So, and two, access was not even there. Like, even for some that were willing to, there was no school.
Yeah.
So, unless very few who were fortunate to be sent to the city, maybe to live with their relatives and others, had such exposure at the time. So, this was one of the fundamental issues until the government now had to say, okay, now we are putting school in almost every community, and in every family, you are obliged to send in a boy and a girl. And at home, I was the one at this age. So this is what put me in school, number one.
At 7 years of age.
At
So
7.
that would be, you were born in 1995, 7 years, that was 2002.
Absolutely.
So the first time your village had a school was in 2002.
Absolutely. Yes. So that was the beginning for us. School, for us, it was also just something fun. We see that, okay, we don't have to go to the farm. We can go to it was not even a structured facility, but some grasses and wood, everything was just put in place. But that coming together as young people, as just kids playing, having fun, for us was everything. So it was not us going into those schools aiming to become a president, to become a minister or whatever, a scientist or whatever. No, it was basically just having fun and not going to the farm. And initially, that was the thing. We kept moving and it developed into passions. And we figured out that actually, with problems our communities were undergoing, from unemployment, from the lack of health facilities, from the inadequate, education standard and all these things, we could actually be instruments of change. So we started aiming for higher opportunities beyond just that school facility. And we have this story when the first rainy season that happened, when the school had already been open, and then there was just some small wind that blows up the entire facility. We all woke up the following morning and realized that there was no place to go to school. So we kept using the community health center, but this is like a place where the nurses will visit every month. So when they are not around, we basically use the place. And if they were around, it's like a holiday for us.
Yeah.
But, we push from there. From primary school now, we aim at going to upper basic school. And then there was a nearby village, but a bit bigger than ours. At the time had a road, they had an upper basic school and even a senior school. But then it is like 5 kilometers away from home. And now, beyond now the passion and everything, it was the willingness to put 10 kilometers every day just to be in a classroom.
And is that what you did?
Absolutely. I did that for complete 4 years before moving to the city.
10 kilometers one way, 10 kilometers
back?
back?
5 kilometers way in and 5 kilometers back. So basically 10 kilometers every day.
What time are you waking up to get to school on time?
Sometimes we are as early as 5 a.m. Our parents would wake us up and obviously prepares us to set for the journey. And now there was no cars, nothing. We just work. So we had to trek from home to school, from school back. Your lucky days would be when you see somebody on a house card or something to say, okay, you guys can join. Until they introduced the school bicycles, and some of us were fortunate to get this. And yeah, it used to be a whole risky journey, all that in the middle of the forest, just young like us. But yeah, we did it because then we were already seeing something.
But I would like to ask you, were your parents supportive of this? Because you've said that previously the society put a lot of emphasis on Islamic training, business, and farming. But obviously now things have changed. They've they've put you in school now, but parents can either kill your dreams or uplift them.
Absolutely.
What kind of parents were yours?
Yeah, I think my mom and dad were my greatest support. Like when I started, it was me, in fact, being more resistant to going to school at some point compared to them. Because I remember my dad would constantly remind me because there was a whole culture of reading. And when I closed from school, I'm forced to read. You know, my mom was always there, everybody. So that support was already there as a family. And beyond just me being the one that started, almost everybody else within the family was also enrolled later on. So it becomes like a bigger community. Just that in the whole village, we didn't have people that we can look up to. Like, okay, this is a graduate from the village, or this is a medical doctor or whatever from the village. We didn't have all that. So it was basically our first badge that had to be everything for the people that are coming.
How much, like there's so many, it's so many, so many interesting parts of what you've said. One, the fact that there was no one to look up to. If there's no one to look up to, how do you even know what to aspire to become?
Yeah, I think then almost all of us, I can say almost the whole school, whosoever you ask is either they tell you, I want to be a president or I want to be an ambassador. Because for us at the time, that was almost everything. That was the reason for going to school and
To become
constantly.
president.
Yeah, like teachers would tell us, oh, you have to aim for these, you know, all the presidents you see were one day here. So those were the kind of story that they tell us in school, and this keeps driving all of us. But it was only later on, obviously, when we grew up, we realized that the opportunities were beyond just those positions. And there is a lot more that going to school would offer. And I think, yeah, we've benefited on that as well.
So obviously, we're now having this conversation here in Kigali, tens of thousands of kilometers from the village and even your high school village. So how does the child from that deep village leave that space, probably come to the capital, because that's probably where a lot of the higher learning was?
Yes.
Walk me through that process.
Yeah, the good thing was when I sat for my grade 9, I realized that I needed to be in a school that would better equip me because I had already seen people in different schools, and I went on a holiday to the city for the first time. This is like 2013.
Which city?
This was in Serekunda, and you know, it's a whole connection from Serekunda to Banjul and all that. So I was living in Suncho Alaji, which happens to be very close to one of the best private schools in Gambia. So while I was there, I decided to go to that school and do their summer studies. So this was the first time me attended summer studies because back in the village during summer, we just go back to support our parents at the farm. And then I realized that actually there was not a big gap between, you know, from the capacity that we had in the village and looking at the potentials of these people. For me, it was they were just in safer places and maybe in schools that offers them more opportunities. They can go there and read at night. Electricity, they had a science lab, you know, computer lab, all these things. And from that moment, I said to myself, I'm not going back to my school. It has to be here. And then obviously I had to now pull the strings. This is a private school, it's not a public one, obviously a little more expensive compared to, where I'm coming from. And now I have to figure out how do I raise the funds.
How much, do you remember how much it was?
Yeah, so this was around, the whole program was around $200, but obviously you have to include other expenses and all that. But then my dad, I could have called and said, okay, how about you just sponsor me to proceed? But then I didn't want that to be any burden. So I had to figure out doing my work, contact few friends, put some money together. I called my dad and said, I've raised enough fund to go into this school and I'm ready to transfer.
No, go slow. So obviously you don't come from great wealth.
Absolutely.
And you have this dream school. This is the program I want to be. Now, $200 probably for you now is not a lot of money.
Sure.
But I'm sure at the time, it will almost seem like a mountain.
Absolutely.
Now, most people, when they reach that kind of crossroads in their life,
Sure.
they will allow the challenge to beat them. What you did was try to find resources within yourself. But I really want to know the nitty-gritty. Where does a young boy, just a teenager, find $200?
Yeah, so number one, because this was summer and I was already working. By the way, I'm a professional barber. So I used to go to the market,
and cut
at
people's
the time.
hair.
And, so that was part of it. And partly was also raised from friends, people I've known for some years who were living abroad. I contacted them and said, I want to move, I need this amount. And, they provided some. Then all together, I put together. It was a very dramatic situation. I remember when I first went to the school and told the admission office that I was here to transfer, and then the person I met there, Mr. Titus, asked, "Where are your parents?" I was like, "No, I'm alone," because I didn't want it.
How old were you now?
I mean, right now or
No,
at the
then
time?
at that time.
At the time, I was just turning like 18. Yes. So I had to, really move fast. And then I was like, yes, I'm just here and I want to do it. I'm here to move. And he was like, but no, where are your parents? You need to pay this. He gave me the everything. And then I paid it up front because I had the money with me. So when I went back to the village, I just went to inform my parents, but it was not basically needing anything from them.
Yeah.
School was done. I was going to stay with my relative in the city. So obviously this was the beginning for me with that journey. And this is what I do. When I got there, I realized that some of the students in the school are coming from very, humble beginning, of course, but some were also coming from families that have almost everything they want. Now, for me, being different means what can I do extra? So I will come to the school early morning, attend classes, finish classes at 2 p.m., go home, have my lunch, come back to the school until evening, go home, have my dinner, come back to the school and spend the night. So this was for me the whole story because the school was like some 500 meters away from home. I would just walk into the gate. And it kind of gave me a whole perspective. This was the beginning of, for me, my academic journey because now I was like, the curriculum is no longer enough. What can I do beyond this reading? What can I do beyond this text? How well can I build connection with teachers, with students to make sure that I'm building a network even before I get to grade 12 because I was already aware of the challenges of going to a university, the challenges of securing a job. But then you're in an institution where almost everybody has a meaning outside of the school. So how do you tap into all this experience? So the school was basically almost everything for me, and that was the beginning of it until I finished my high school and got the admission to the University of the Gambia the same year. And yes, I was enrolled in the university. Again, getting the university admission was not everything. Number one, you get the admission. Now the university is asking for $36,000, and that is around $800 at the time.
Oh, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, and this is 2016. Again, you don't want to go to a family that was in the remotest areas in the village. All they do is farming, and then you want to put such burden on them. I need to pull the same strength I pulled when I was transferring from like upper basic to senior school, and it works again. And this time around, I had to connect with friends, both in the Gambia and outside the Gambia, brothers here and there. Some of them were also in the city and building businesses, and it was catching up slowly. With the little work I was doing, and then get to the university at the same time, started working for one of my brothers. So I was busy in the logistic company and at the same time going to the university. So raising money for school was no longer an issue. There was already a job that was giving me a little bit of an experience. And every summer, I go back to the village to offer the summer studies that I didn't have at the time. So this gave me another connection with the young ones growing up. And obviously, this is 2016, and being the first person from my village to be enrolled in a university.
Fantastic.
So it was, for me, I wished, because when we started, we were around 150 students. But down the line, nobody was at the university. And now this, for me, is not a celebration, but it means a lot was wrong. Some of the women were married, some of the young men lost maybe track down the line. They didn't have, maybe the financial support. Others just didn't have the proper guidance. And, a lot of them became dropouts and all that. Others stopped at grade 12. They managed to get the national exam, but still didn't have the funds to go to the uni.
But what drives? I come from a family of academics, and to be honest, if I had not been, if I did not have that family pressure to perform, I don't know if I would have made the hard choices to study harder than I needed to. Those late nights trying to, that stress that comes with, oh my God, I don't want to be a family disappointment. You on the other hand, you had a different kind of pressure. The expectations for you were maybe a bit less, because again, when you're the first, the expectations are maybe your own, but not the community's expectations on you, because they say, the uncle, the auntie, father, mother, we all from this background. If he stops in secondary school, that's still a win. If you don't graduate university and you do 2 years, that's still the first person in our whole maybe district who's ever got to that level. Sure. You've talked about your classmates who started with you, and along the way, all of them dropped out. We can say that they made a mistake on dropping out, but fundamentally, they made certain choices in their life. I want to understand properly, what was it about you and the dreams that you had that made you go beyond your community's expectations of you?
Yeah, number one, I have very strong parents who constantly, would remind me of the choices they've made with me going to school. and that I can be anyone, no matter what my background was. And this was a constant reminder, like I would receive from my dad, I would receive from my mother. And again, when I look at all my colleagues, even those that were younger, there was always this burden thing as to if we all failed, who are they all going to look up to? There needed to be a break in that chain. And for me, I was like, it's either all of us or maybe me alone, but somebody has to prove that it is possible from this village, from this community, and other young people can also look up to that. So it was basically that experience that pushed us to whatever we continue to do.
What did you study in the University of the Gambia?
Yeah, the University of the Gambia, I was enrolled in the School of Arts and Sciences, doing development studies.
And was that what you had dreamed to do, or did you end up being in that faculty?
I wouldn't say dream of, but this is what happened. While I was in high school, I was very close to one of my teachers who studied development. And in high school, he used to give me a lot of books on economics, administration, development to read. So this triggers, a lot of passion for me on development because I was already looking at community challenges and all that and connecting it to the suffering, to the, lack of facilities and other things that my people were undergoing every day. For me, this was an ultimate path to kind of be that change agent for that community back home. So, yes, this teacher influenced me a lot. And then I had to make that choice prior to going, in fact, to the university. So, when we sat for the exams and all that, I was already reading some of the introductory courses and books in the field during the holiday before papers were out. And, I just enrolled and that was it.
Now, although Rwanda is among the smallest African countries, I did my research and actually found that the Gambia is literally the smallest country in Africa in terms of land size, not in terms of the people. Yeah. And I think because of its land size and where it is positioned on the continent, very, very few Africans, maybe only West Africans, really know anything about the Gambia, the place that you call home. So I'm just going to ask you a question. What would you wish that people knew about the country that you call home?
Yeah, I think number one would definitely be that we are one of the most peaceful people in the continent. And this is, a lot to do with the culture of Gambians and I think the environment in which we live in. Because of our small size as well in population and even geography, we almost know everyone. Like that's the normal saying people say, because in almost every family that you enter, there is maybe one person that is coming from a different family that come in. You look at the tribes, there is general intermarriage between the tribes. So in one house, you can find a Fulani, a Mandinka, a Wolof, and a Jola. And this gave us a very strong social fabric as Gambians to live harmoniously as a people. And very beautiful beach as well. So those are some of the great things. Unless in recent years, where almost everywhere I've been, somebody would ask me, "Oh, are you the country that the president refused to go to leave after losing the elections?" And I think, so that was another story that somehow put the Gambia on the global map again.
I'd like to talk to you about one of the biggest issues that I think is devastating Africa, and that's the issue with brain drain. And I think even worse than brain drain, which is, I think, a cancer, is the fact that you're now also having not just brain drain, the classical sense where people used to graduate, jump on planes, and leave the continent. Now they are literally risking their lives, young African men, women, risking their lives to flee their homes and their communities in the hope that they shall reach some kind of European heaven. Now, I know that that's there are certain countries that are dealing with that problem quite a bit. You look at, say, for example, Eritrea. I think some of the countries. I think Senegal is also doing quite. Mali. Is it an issue in the Gambia as well?
Yeah. Here is the thing. Back in 2016, this has been going on way before then, but from 2014, 2015, 2016, Gambia had a peak of experience when it comes to the back way, we locally call it.
The back way?
Yes, that's going to Europe through Libya and through the Mediterranean. The reason why I'm bringing this context is because I was in a school where some people that were there were believed to be people with hope. Yet, I had tons of my schoolmates and classmates that left the classes and school to join
the back
bus, the small boats through the back way. Some of them made it to the other coast. Some of them didn't.
Do you know people who have died trying to get to Europe?
Absolutely, a lot of people. I grew up with people that today lost their lives through the Mediterranean Sea. These were either friends that lived in our neighborhood or friends that I was in the same school with, even those that I shared the same class with. Because back in 2014, 15, 16, almost in every house in the Gambia, there was a young person that was, either wanting to go or had already left. So this was a lot at the time.
What's happening? Because you've identified a year, 2014, 15, 16. What is happening at that time that kind of creates this craze?
I mean, number one, it was a phenomenon. Like initially, people used to go through the back way, but they used to even use the Atlantic Ocean, using some boats, to Morocco, then from there to Spain. But then the other route was put to light because a lot of them were still traveling, but they ended up stopping in Libya. So before the Libyan crisis in 2011-12, many people who were going from Gambia to Europe would just stop in Libya because some of them would see enough to work and get paid and were doing well. Now, the West, with its propaganda, obviously, and the ultimate termination of Muammar Gaddafi, resulted to the crisis in Libya. And now these young people that were going could no longer stay in Libya, but they had to cross. Now, crossing, some succeeded. And back home, once you send photos or videos, I mean, it was just everybody's wish to kind of take the whole journey. And it was taking them a month, others two, others within weeks. So almost everybody, was thinking that it was also a possibility route for them.
Now because it's really interesting for me to understand the thinking of people, your old schoolmates. They were living life, and now the dream of getting to Europe became so worth it that they're willing to risk everything. Then I start asking myself a question. What was so wrong with home that you said that young men, young women are saying, I'd rather die? Because I've been to Europe.
Sure.
It's nice, but there's nothing fundamentally special there. You've said that, the Gambia is peaceful, peace-loving, communities live well together. what is making young men, young women want to risk everything? And I'm sure it wasn't even cheap.
Sure.
What is making them do that?
Yeah, I think migration generally has push and pull factors. So back home in the Gambia, here are very young people, well talented. They're in schools with great ambitions that they would ultimately graduate and to become something. But once you walk outside of the school corridors, you see people of the same certificates that you're aiming to have or that you're dreaming of, merely in streets doing jobs that even those that have never been to school are also struggling to do. So on the same space, you had a lot of young individuals who have also succeeded, and this was the peak of, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram posts everywhere on social media. So there was a big influence on the people that life was good on the other side. And as a result of this, you had many individuals, and now this is not just about people with graduating and the list goes on. No, but there are people who have actually graduated. They, in fact, in workplaces who are leaving their jobs to go through the Mediterranean Sea. And this is the same context, not only in Gambia, but you will find in many other African countries. The reason why most of these young people are leaving is not because they don't have skills, it's not because they don't have knowledge. It is because the skills they acquired, the knowledge they have, does not pay them to stay in their countries. And we've seen a wave on that, where from security forces, from teachers, people with jobs that we think are paying would leave that to go through the back way. And not only that, there was also another wave that often is not talked about. And this is the young African women and even men that are using not the back way, but on proper channels, using agencies going through the Middle East. And yes, the back way is more of a phenomenon that you see around West Africa on people going to Europe. But then, as somebody who travels a lot within East Africa and Southern Africa, you almost come across a group of 20s, 30s transiting on every airport. These are young people, young girls who have graduated university degrees, some with their college certificates, some of them with well earning jobs outside of the African continent, will leave all that to become what? Caretakers in the Middle East. Now, this was a context through which most young Africans, not only in Gambia, were living through. I remember we used to have people that would come to the schools and even preach to us on the dangers of the journey, why you should not take it. But who are they speaking to you? These are basically people maybe writing their thesis from Oxford University, people who, I mean, they're already there. When they come, even the tune in which they speak is different, the vehicles that they come into the schools is different. Now you're telling yourself, why should I listen to you? So these conversations were not really trickling down on some of the young people like myself at the time. And most people will tell you that they see nothing other than crossing. It's either they make it or they do not, because there was a lot of pressure back home. I used to tell people this: almost every young person that I've come across the African continent or even beyond, and they have experienced this journey, you ask them questions about why they took the journey, they will tell you economic reasons. I was born and raised in a family. I see the sufferings of my parents, my mom, and I cannot do nothing about it. This journey presents me at least a solution that I will either be there and be able to send in $1 or two every week, or not be there at all. So I do not become a burden on such family. So these are some of the reasons at the time that many young people have. But then I think a proper assessment of this whole situation would be the deliberate action of African leaders having to now sit down and observe such a precious resources that have triggered development in every society around the world. Now Africans are losing it to the jobs they're doing, or to dying at sea, or to dying through the desert, and the list goes on. And we ask ourselves, because in almost every society around the world, when they're exporting their very best, they go with an aim of returning back. And these people would acquire every skill and knowledge around the world to come back and impact. But in so many African societies, in so many African countries today, back home becomes a big frustration for somebody that has acquired enough skills to add value. Very few African countries today recognizes the potentials within the diaspora. I've worked on projects that basically brings back these young people, boys and girls with ideas, back home to the Gambia to work on projects. Either they're bringing in their technical know-how or they're bringing in little finances, and our agency supports them to partner with local people to trigger change and development in communities. And we've seen the resolve of some of these development. And at the time, what we ask ourselves is, why is it difficult for our leaders to just address the pressing issues of guaranteeing paid employment, guaranteeing, proper education system, guaranteeing that health system, that when our old parents get sick, we are not at a burden of what comes next, but we know that there is a solution that lies ahead.
I like that, and maybe we'll continue to dig deeper. There's something that I do want to ask though. Why didn't you take the back way? Because everything that you've said could have applied to you. You were in school, you were seeing these people coming in, you were seeing the graduates out on the streets without jobs, you were seeing the people in the ministries selling everything and going off. You did not, as you said, you did not come from wealth. There was nothing for everything that could have been an excuse. You had every single excuse to take the back way. Maybe I'm assuming that you did not, but maybe perhaps you tried. Did you even, one, did you ever try? And number two, if you never tried, why? What about your life or your dreams stopped you from making that decision?
Number one, I have never tried. That's one. And two, I had to make these choices because even when I had options to go formally, I refused to go. And for me, I had always looked at this situation as a very critical one on us losing these resources. And at the time, I had enough people like around me that would tell me that with this, there's great potentials. With this, Usman, we think you can get into this space. And this is not the reality for everybody. There are people that come from very decent and have everything back home, but this conversation might be the smallest thing that they lack that resulted to them joining through the back way. And I had mentors, I had people that constantly engage me in positive conversation as to what I can do with my education at the time and even with the exposure. So I am one person that from high school, even transiting to university, I was already, on clear opinions about Africa and the West. So obviously, this was a time when I didn't want it to have any touch from Europe or wheresoever, but just to be that African product that would tell a generation of young Africans that yes, there are possibilities within the continent as well.
So I'm a bit older than you. Not a bit, I'm actually quite older than you. Almost a decade and a half. So the way I see Africa is maybe quite differently from the way you see it. So I'd like to hear what you think of our continent. should a young man like you, at the cusp of your life, you're about to, the ages 30 and between 30, 40, 50. Those are what we call, I like to think, the prime of your life, the prime earning, that's when you have the prime earning potential. That is when you're thinking about starting a family. That's when you are really thinking about building your home, building a business that lasts quite long. So people like you, when you think about Africa, are you hopeful for the continent? And the reason I ask this is that, when you look at what's happening around the continent, you look at places like the DRC, Nigeria, Sudan, South Africa. It almost seems that all the messaging that you're getting as a young person is that Africa is a basket case, only besieged by poverty, disease, conflict, corruption, and poor leadership. As a young person who's getting this messaging through your TikTok, through your Facebook, that's all you see. Do you have hope, not just necessarily even for the continent, but even for the concept of Pan-Africanism? Is there hope for us?
Thank you so much for this question. Growing up in the Gambia to where I am today, all I have always been looking for is for living in a better community. And this does not mean running away from the community, but making that community look better. And here is my experience so far, looking at different African contexts, from Congo to Nigeria, from South Sudan to Central African Republic, and the list goes on. These are communities where it should have looked like a space where if I walk in, all I would see is value, all I will see is growth, all I will see is development, all I will see is resources that are of benefit to the people that live within it. Now, the experience is different. What we ask ourselves is how do we even get there? And what should be the instrument of change? Number one, we're looking at a new space of leadership where leaders that takes responsibility, leaders that know that they're leading a community in order to realize a vision. And this vision is the ultimate growth and development that everybody desires. Now, just like me in the streets of the Gambia, when I walk barefooted or run around in those school campuses, there was nothing that I was stepping on. But the average Congolese on barefooted, running around, is stepping on minerals, on resources that powers every industry outside of this continent. And that young kid is not taught anything that adds value to those resources. Now, that's the problem one, that the education system that we receive now is not fit in purpose. This is the reality in many African society. And moving beyond that is, it has been made in our heads that there's going to be a united Africa in which the resources would power the development of this continent. Forgetting that the best assets for development is not the minerals. It's the brain that makes those minerals work. And we're losing a lot in refusing to address that situation. Now, you move further, many African countries today are in a leadership crisis. There are very few examples like Rwanda when it comes to success in leadership and development. Now, How do we address this leadership crisis? Do we continue to relent on a system in which we believe we are solely participating and are responsible of, when very few people have a choice on who becomes what in such societies? Now, I have experienced the Gambia where I was born and walked to school with basically no big ambition of becoming anything but just to have fun, to walking in streets of different African societies and see the potentials that their future offers them. Now, what the hope would look like is the original calling of what Pan Africanism was to the people that preached it before. And that was on self reliance and self upliftment. This continent that we are in, this is 2024, and over 70% of food is imported into the continent. That's not self-reliance. And that is why in the very beginning, I noted, especially when we see the crisis of today, what do we do with it? Now, I will only be hopeful for a future in which Africa strives and Africa is in its rightful lane if, number one, the continent speaks with a voice, the continent's leadership is oriented by development and not by tribe, religion, or sentiments of people outside the continent. And these are the kind of realities that not just myself, but I think millions of young Africans today are asking similar questions in their societies, in their communities, in their countries, on what is wrong with the leadership and what solution do we offer.
So then what solution do you offer?
Exactly, and that's what I was coming to. First, we want to see an Africa in which education is functional. A functional education doesn't mean just going to school and acquiring certificates, but going to schools that teaches us about who we are and what we are, and teaching us about the skills that makes life and livelihood better for now and for the future. For the past few years, I spent a lot of time on entrepreneurial development for young Africans, but also building platforms that would spotlight those young Africans that are building innovative skills that helps their communities in making them a better one. But this is not the only solution. That's just the education part. What do we do with the economy? Here is Ousman, who can voice my opinions in a platform about how I want Africa to look like. But then you have a leader who signs that decision on what a country, a community looks like. How do we make sure that they carry the same message? That when they look at contracts, they're looking at the future of their sons and daughters and not that little time they're left with to live in this world. That is a conversation that has to go deep into the African societies. And number two, this continent has to do away from believing that our reality, our narrative, our economies, our development is going to be informed by the West. To just give you a context, one of your neighbors, Yas Tandun of Uganda, wrote a book on trade as war, the West war against the world, outlining the fundamental reasons why we are more of an extract society rather than a development-oriented one, where almost everything we trade is like an instrument of war that keeps impoverishing communities from where these resources are being extracted and not even having a small detail of any significant development in those communities.
I'd like to ask you something. One of the things that I believe is that we have a choice in the things that we do. You could say that, the West does this, our African leaders do this, and we want education, but fundamentally, I also believe that some of these things that are happening to us, we allow them to happen to us. We are participants in our own doom, if I may. So I want to continue asking you, because you've noted politicians and global systems and the president signing things, but at the end of the day, it's your life. It's your life as an African young person, as a young Gambian, as a young Rwandan. It is your life. And you have to take some sense of ownership on it. So, what I'd like to ask you is, what are the things that young Africans can do in order to take ownership for the challenges they face?
Yeah. Number one, it has to do with the self. A lot has to be done. I know from our mindset as young Africans, how do we more look into solutions rather than problems? And I always say this, there's no scarcity of problems in the continent. The moment you walk outside of your door, you face the reality. But then, how do we put more energy on thinking solutions? And this is where the young people are coming in right now. This continent has brilliant minds of young people that are building platforms from e-commerce, technology-oriented digital spaces to fundamental inventions that are solving problems on health-related issues, community development challenges, and other realities. And these are the same young people that are not waiting for a government to come to them, but have thought of taking up such responsibilities and making sure that they have something to offer their communities. Now, for me, it's beyond those impact projects and programs, is how do we also keep the conversation? And now it's a reality. Young people in Africa are more interested in the way this continent is governed now more than ever before. Um, and these demands, these questions, these conversations is the beginning of the Africa that we want to live in. Now, the reason why I'm saying that this conversation is instrumental is because a few years ago, very few from the Gambia or from Kenya or from Nigeria would sit together with other Africans, in fact, discussing or having ideas as to what can we do, when it comes to integration, when it comes to development, when it comes to moving together in a platform for development. So all these things we have not been doing. Now we are seeing a wave of Africans that are being interested in such conversation. They're interested in these discussions, and not only in the continent, even beyond. Another thing that is like a wave, maybe also has a lot to do with my line of work, is I see a lot of young Africans now who are trying to reconnect back home. These are Africans that are coming, they've acquired skills in universities, network opportunities, and everything, and are now trying to see what can they do back home. I've worked in key projects that today when I go and look at these spaces, all I do is feel proud of these young people, that they are no longer, they're not saying, oh, the government is not doing this. They're not saying the West have done this, but they're coming and taking up full responsibility in those spaces. But saying all this doesn't mean that we should not still hold leadership and the West accountable for some of the challenges that this continent is going on up to today. Because the system has been very deep. Some African countries have experienced serious destruction, either by individual leaders or by Western instrument. And it is not a new thing. It is evidence that sub-Saharan Africa was more impoverished by the structural adjustment plan more than anything back in the 70s and 80s. So these are things that are up to date, a reality that we undergo on a daily basis, and these are challenges that needs to be addressed. And sometimes it takes the leadership space, and that is why we must not cease to talk about that. In some countries, thinking about like leadership, holding them accountable, engaging with the leaders, telling them that these are the new pathways that development has to take is a difficult channel. But not only that, you're having a younger generation that is more into digital space and technology. They're interacting with artificial intelligence, and the list goes on. In a country that has not even developed policies or vision that addresses this current reality. So there's a whole gap between what tools the younger generation is playing with and the policies that governs the society. So we have to work together, and we have to find a way to make sure that the skills, the ideas that these young people are developing, they have more platforms through which they can embrace.
I'd like to take this opportunity to unpack a decision that you made in your life that many would call controversial. So a few years back, you had the opportunity to get a scholarship to the great country of Canada. Now, for most Africans, that is a dream come true. But you chose to reject that opportunity to go to North America, instead opting to actually come to Kigali and enter a local university to study development. Now, someone hearing that could think Ousman is crazy. This is not a normal person. How dare you, let that lottery ticket that is, a Canadian scholarship, because from a Canadian scholarship, then you graduate and then you get a Canadian visa. Then after the Canadian visa, then you get a Canadian work permit. And then all of a sudden, you have the magical blue passport that says that you are a citizen. And for many African young people, and even older people, to be honest, that is their dream. That's their African dream. But yours was not the same. I'd like to have a better understanding of the reasons why. Why would you choose Kigali over Toronto or Winnipeg or Vancouver? Not just, by the way, it wasn't just, with our decisions, like I said in my first question, there are many people that are involved in the life decisions that we make. Obviously, you probably told your parents about that opportunity, and these are parents who've probably never been in a plane before, and they're hearing that their son is going to get the opportunity to go to these great Western capitals and learn from the gods of Canadian academia. But then you then tell your parents, no, mom, dad, that's not what I'm going to do. That is not my path in life. How do your parents deal with not just the news that you've gotten the opportunity, because that's obviously joy. Then there's the news that you hit them with, which is like, by the way, despite them giving me this opportunity, I'm going to reject it. I'm going to a little East African country called Rwanda to study in a small capital city called Kigali. How do they receive that information? So I guess it's a two kind of question, right?
Sure.
What makes you what drives you to make that choice in your life? Two, how does your community, the people that love you the most, who wish you the best, how do they receive that very, if we're to be honest, very strange decision from a young man?
Yeah, it's on both ends. Now, number one, I read development studies in my undergrad, and I was already interested in African economists, development writers, history writers about the continent. And at the peak of, or almost like at the end of the program, I was already in classes where we used to organize seminars in development. So we basically profile African countries and compare them to other countries. It can be in South America, North America, or Europe, or Asia. But even like prior to this, I was already having a context of development trajectory and profiles of different African countries because I was reading some of those things in other development work and also following some key African, writers like the Samir Amin, the Walter Rodneys, and the others who have written extensively about the challenges of this continent and also its economic and trade issues. When I got to the university, and now that we were in serious reviews of some of these countries, I took it, as a personal challenge, not just to meet marks. For me, it was necessary now to know which African country is breaking the chain of dependency, which African countries is, putting the seed of genuine leadership, and which African country is also handling current context and realities in a positive way and yielding positive outcome. Now, in these reviews, you look at different countries, and for me, Rwanda was an exceptional story. Knowing where this country came from, from a genocide against the Tutsi that left, almost, you know, the country devastated in different ways. People have left the country. Its development was weakened to zero. There was nothing like, economic growth, and the list goes on. I was looking at the life expectancy rate, the health care system, looking at, its education level. And then you ask yourself, how was this transition from 2000 to 2020 or 2019? That this same country with this story um, is now at the spotlight of development discourse, trade discourse, international relations, and other things. It only takes some deliberate actions and proper leadership with clear visions in getting these things done. So I put that aside as one African country that I can definitely trust on emulating and studying what works. And now you were faced with another reality of which other country in the West. We keep reviewing different things. We saw the development context and realities, the trajectories, the time it took, and all those things. But for me, this was not the thing. I was at a point where I just wanted to be an African product, somebody that trusts the African institutions, that trust that Africa can have things that work, that trust that Africa can actually teach the world about leadership, about development, about a lot of things by setting a new shift in doing things. Um, so I had already made up my mind that I would definitely like to do, another university program within the continent, and Rwanda was on the top of the list. But not only that, now it was the question of this day where you just wake up. I told you I was already working under one of my brothers at a logistic company. And one evening, my phone was almost, freezing. Calls were coming in, text messages. You had people reaching out all over the world that, we are reaching out, young man, because of the video you made, And that was like 7 months ago. And I had to even go online and look at, because naturally that was not my thing. I studied development, and development practitioners are usually behind cameras. And another thing as well is I was already in a space where I was working. So for me, it was transitioning from there to something else, but nothing on the spotlight. Then ultimately, a lot of people came with offers, from scholarships, from jobs, from ambassadorships, and the list goes on. At that point, I didn't want to make any decision. So it took me weeks to just let the whole dust settle. And then I can sit with my consent, engage the people that I need to engage, to tell them that this has already been my aim.
So it was a YouTube video that you did that actually made you viral. Is that what you're
Absolutely.
saying?
Yes.
Who did you, how did that happen? Was it something that you had planned? What YouTube video was it? What was the topic? What was the subject matter?
Now, I'll tell you this funny thing. I was one of the students that always protest, like speak against having French civilization in our university.
Mm.
So this day I was supposed to be in a class for French civilization, and I dodged from that class to go and attend a Pan-African conference in one of the hotels. So it was while in that Pan-African conference, and then I was looking at the panel. Everybody was there speaking about Africa, its development, why we didn't. But then it was a whole generational gap. These were very old folks with their old wisdom, but I felt like they were not saying what we really want as young people. I stepped out with a friend of mine, and then I saw this lady with her cameras and wares everywhere. I was like, oh, this is Blackset. I was like, you're doing a great job, because I've been seeing her contents online. I was like, keep it up. And, she was like, oh, but for the first time, someone from Gambia is actually appreciating my work. Do you mind saying this on camera? That was it. 3 minutes.
So
50
Blacksit,
seconds.
so that people that I know who she is, who's Blacksit?
Yeah, so she's also an African descendant who currently moved to the Gambia. And she has been coming to the Gambia, I think, since 2017, and currently runs a Black Seed channel that basically, informs and engage on conversations around people returning. But at the time, it was more of like just showing images, beachside, everything about the Gambia. This is how the channel started, and I was so much interested in those contents, and this is how I reached out to her. So yeah, me appeared before that screen, 3 minutes, few seconds. We did the interview. I gave her my number, and I think she gave me her number as well. But that was it. Like, I just said my opinion. It's just like you walk to a conference, then talk to some journalists and leave.
What were you guys talking about?
Yes, he asked a pertinent question on the Gambia. What do I think about Africa and some of us as young scholars? And then I gave her an answer on, what we need to do as young people, rather than, just shifting the blame on everybody, but taking up those responsibilities to rewrite the history of the continent and to repaint Africa in an image that shows potentials and possibilities. Also, mention some of the people that were instrumental in making Africa, a continent that just looks like a farmland where Westerns can come in, use the people, take everything from the land, and claim ownership. So this was the conversation, and 7 months after that interview, I had completely lost track.
You'd even probably forgotten about it.
Forgotten about it, yeah. And I was just sitting there one day in the office, and then I see from my phone, people were tagging me everywhere. So I realized that, okay, then it must have been the impact of the video. And yeah, this was the beginning of it. And from there, I had to allow everything to settle. And then I went on to engage my brothers, friends on almost all the conversations that were coming in. For me, it was even first more impressive with the people that you were just in touch overnight. Okay, like this thing just happened, you're getting calls almost everywhere around the world. In less than a week, I was on Zoom calls with global leaders, including presidents, giving
Which president?
perspectives. So the first one was Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and the second one was President Paul Kagame.
You were
And
on a phone call with him?
this
Zoom?
was like a Zoom call, and it was done through the Africa Continental Free Trade because they were also launching at the time. This is 2020, and also the UNDP was part of the organizer. So I was part of the youths featured in. We all interacted. So for me, that was good. But then the decision of what do you really want to become? Are you doing this just for the crowd and people will talk, or do you want to just be remembered as the kid that did the interview, or you just want to be somebody that is behind solutions and change across the continent? So that practical aspect is what I was more interested in. And for me, Rwanda stands out, and I had to engage everybody. My parents didn't really have a problem. I tell you, my dad, this is the trick. Even if you want money from him, use education. Like, you get it. Because he's so much passionate in knowledge, that's the only way. So I engaged with him, my mom, everybody, brothers, and said, well, this is my decision and this is what I want to do. And I got everybody's support. And I think it is a decision that I can take, 10 times with no regrets.
So you decide to come here. If it's not a secret, what university had you chosen to study in?
So even before coming here, there were already universities that I engaged in. But first, I didn't come for studies, like to a university. I came for like a short training program. And this was deliberate because I needed to have a context of Rwanda now in practice. I did like during COVID, I was here for like 1 month plus, engaged with, different people, went around the country, did some training here on leadership, on some mentorship with, institutions, then left to Kenya through PLO Lumumba, went back. And after that, I had to now look at different universities. And then I ended up getting admission in two. I don't know if it is an advert or
no.
Yeah, but yes, one with ALU and another one with Mount Kenya, that is now Mount Kigali.
Okay, and which one did you choose?
Both.
So you're doing a joint program?
Program, yes.
I'd like to ask you, when did you kind of come here to settle?
Yeah, so most of the time when I was coming, prior to starting school, I had also come in different capacities, like events, conferences, where you get invited in to come and speak and go. So that was it. But I think more so is towards the end of 2023 and 2024, when I decided to now come beyond just schooling to come and live, to start up, like a company, and also look at other opportunities within the East African country, so region. So while in Rwanda, I can tap into the opportunities within the sub-region because movement is much easier. And this, I've already set up a company that focuses on, entrepreneurial development and obviously providing consultancy for some agencies that are working on graduate programs to support university students get into job spaces. But beyond that, I came from a family that was built on, different businesses now. And we had our production line for perfumes in Senegal. And now we've moved that beyond Senegal to Gambia, to Nigeria, to Ivory Coast. And Rwanda is going to be the next hub for East Africa. And we'll be taking that to the rest of the region as well.
Now, as an African moving and living in Rwanda, the context obviously is on social media. There's often African migrants or African migration is not given a positive image, especially when you think about certain places. I'm talking about South Africa and how they've been treating Africans coming in with horrendous instances of xenophobia, terrorism, because I call it terrorism, and the way Africans have treated other Africans has not always been the best. I would like to ask you personally, on your lived experience here in the country, have you dealt with any instances of xenophobic behavior and things that we could only term cultural clashes?
No. No, I've not experienced anything like that. And I happens to have like very close, friends and very close people from this country that since I came, we built a rapport. And some of them I've worked with, we went all the way to the Gambia to launch key programs there, work together, coming back here. So for me, Rwanda is like a home for me. I feel safe in this country, just like I'll be walking in the streets of the Gambia. I have generally no issues. I go to places that everybody goes to. The rest I'm at home, just walking.
So, us Rwandans have our own views of this country and President Paul Kagame. Now, our views are based off of our own history as, a post-conflict country, the things that happened to us during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, as well as the steps the country has made since then. So we have a way that we see our leadership and the country as a whole. Now, what you have is what I think is something interesting, which is you have an external view, right? So you're not coming in with a preconceived notion. You're not coming in with, a viewpoint that is framed, that is a framework of, trauma. You're coming in as an African, seeing the people as they are, seeing the country as it is, not based off of what it was 30 years ago, because you were not here. See, when I see the country, when I judge Paul Kagame, it's from my own life, being born a refugee, coming into the country in 1994, seeing the devastation, and then seeing every single road being built. I think I'm of that generation where I'm young enough not to have seen a lot of the things that happened, before, but I'm also old enough to appreciate everything that has happened, right? Because of I'm at that age group. So every building, every road, every school, every hospital, I see the country and I see the president based off of that. Now you, on the other hand, you came in for the first time in 2020?
2020, yes.
2020. So you probably came in and, the things that amaze me, you just think that was the Rwanda I found. That is the Rwanda that exists today. So I would like to kind of, based off of all those things that I've said and your own viewpoint, and as a young person, what is Rwanda for you? How do you see Rwanda today? How do you see our president? What does he mean to you? And I'm talking about that not as an you're almost an outsider but an insider. How does he? I don't want you to answer that question as like an African, because when we talk about as Africans, we also kind of remove our own lived experience. You have lived in this country. You've opened a country in this country. Opened a business in this country. You've gone to school in this country. You've had Rwandan professors. You've dealt with Rwandan police. You've dealt with Rwandan civil servants. You've been probably a part of national events where you've heard the president's speeches, you've seen him in action. What does Rwanda as a country, Rwandans as a people, and President Paul Kagame, what do they mean to you?
Yeah, thank you very much. Prior to coming to Rwanda, I had done a little bit of an assignment, and this is trying to understand what country am I going to, like beyond just the understanding of taking that decision. And I can tell you this that it went beyond my expectation. When I first walked into this country, the following day I went to one of the buildings in one of the bookshops, and I bought a book. Um, I mean, not to yes, but I bought a book written by experts within Rwanda and outside, and the book was basically on Rwandan solution, like practical solution to practical problems. Um, just a book one can read within a day or two. I went back to my apartment, and I was busy reading and rereading that context to at least now as an insider, but this was at the peak of COVID. You don't get to meet people all over. You couldn't have that, in-person interaction because of, the restrictions around movements and all that. Books were my ultimate option. And this interaction gave me now a whole practical solutions from policies, from practical projects and programs, from vision sets within the country. And then I had the opportunity of interacting with international organizations that are also doing few activities here to see what their programs look like, what are some of the things they're addressing. But for me, this whole thing wasn't just enough. It is when I started now having the in-person, interaction with the average Rwandan, discussing about what really had happened here and how they look at the country now. And what I can tell you is this is a country where it is an opportunity to be born within in this period of time because there is a general vision and there is a practical model, something that work. Now, you move to different African countries, even beyond the borders of Rwanda, you're going to see a lot of contexts where you see things that do not work. And people have constantly been on it and it still didn't work. For me, it was the ultimate decision of Rwanda saying, we are Rwandan, our problems, our solution, our future, our destiny, our vision, and we welcome anyone that can participate in making this a reality. For me, that is what brought me, and that is what brought equally lovers of this country into Rwanda. Now, this perspective is not just the infrastructural development of this country. Yes, it's amazing, it's well organized. But beyond that, I looked at the statistics and I asked myself, how was this even? Like, how did they do these things? Looking at a country where economic growth was down to zero, to a GDP growth of 9 to 10% in 2020. Looking at a country that was life expectancy was less than 50 to 69, aiming at 70 in about a year or so. And different other numbers that you look at and you interact, you go and see the people, and it tells you that yes, these are actually the reality. That these people can look back 30 years and maybe be in tears, but if they look at the future, they can smile with hope of a Rwanda with possibilities and a Rwanda with opportunities. This was number one. For me, it is the impressiveness of what has been done in this country for it to be where it is. But as someone who wants to see an Africa where things work, I was at the position of saying, how can we have this Rwanda model of development, of vision and leadership in different other African countries?
Do you think it can like having lived in this country, do you think that the model can be replicated? Or maybe the better question is,
yes.
You come from Gambia. You've lived in Rwanda for the last, been in and out of Rwanda for the last 4 or so years. If you could speak to the Gambian electorate, Gambian leadership, Gambian population, what would you say about the Rwandan model, and how would you get the Rwandan model that you in your own words, you say that it works? How would you how would you want to transfer that model in your own context? Because everything is about context. There can only be one Paul Kagame. There can only be one Rwandan people. We have our own context as a people, and then that made us make the choices that we've made, both negative and positive. Now, through our own lived experience and trying to make sense of our world, we've created a model that some would say is a good model. So how do you get that model? How would you get that model and take it back home?
Yeah, thank you so much. So this is where it works. We are not looking at maybe a time in the year where we say President Paul Kagame and maybe 1 million Rwandan move to the Gambia and do these things within a month and come back to Rwanda. But what we are advocating for is a leadership of vision and a people of responsibility. Now, this is a reality here that yes, there is leadership, there is a vision, and there is that sense of belongingness where somebody is telling you as Rwandan that we all know where we are coming from. This is what we have done over the years, and this is the possibilities of where Rwanda has to be in the near future. Now, that is not just a statement. It is strategies, it is vision, it is action that makes those deliverable count. What African states, including the Gambia, have failed to do from independence to date is looking at things that work from African countries from within and see how it can work in our respective countries. You have a lot of people around the continent that would champion, oh, go to Canada, copy something, go to China, copy something, go to Europe, copy something, but not even looking next door. So for me, development is a process. And the reason why we are advocating for um, a Rwandan development model in different African countries is basically the fact that it has been tried and it works. The fact that you are not saying as a people that no, we have to rely here today, we have to rely there. No, you are saying as Rwandan, we need homegrown solution. We need people around the world who sees this vision with us to come and contribute with us. That is a reality that I believe the Gambia can do. Many other African countries can also do. And in fact, we are at a position to do it even quicker. You look at almost all development trajectories and stories around the world. Europe, it took them over 300 years. US, 300, 200 years. You look at Canada, you look at the Asian countries, for instance, it is for the past 50, 40 years that they have really been on real development lanes. You look at countries like the Middle East today is for the past 30 years, and the list goes on. When you are looking at Rwanda, you're basically talking about 2000 to date. For me, it's the miraculous efforts being done within these 20, 25 years to get this country to where it is. That is the vision, and that is the strategies. Those are the clarities that African states today needs to look into and emulate. There is nothing wrong learning from a system or from a practice that work. So yes, if it comes to the Gambia, it's going to be on a different context, but the vision is going to be the same. You are building a society that is merit focused. You are building a society that equally says that it takes us as the sole responsible of what the future of the Gambia has to be. And basically, it shouldn't be difficult to get people to comply with this story. I have a friend of mine who have written a book called The Formula for Accelerated Growth, Rwanda's Success Story. And in that, he outlined some of the strategies used in this country, from setting up a vision to communicating a vision that people now have a sense of responsibility that this is theirs and this is where they belong, and to building a process over time, and how success follows. And I don't think this is a difficult thing to do in different African countries.
I don't disagree with you. Ousman Touray, thank you so much for joining me on the long form.
Thank you.
I've learned quite a bit about your thought process, and I've learned a lot about the beautiful country of the Gambia. I wish you nothing but success. I'll be watching you as you navigate this world, and maybe to go back to the dreams of a child, maybe one day, one day,
Thank you.
I'll see you as an ambassador or a president.
Or maybe just as a businessman around. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you enjoyed the conversation today, share your thoughts with us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.